And welcome to another episode of All Things Conflict. And I'm really excited today because, we've got some really quality guests coming on this podcast. And today I'm really happy to introduce to you Simon Woodroffe. And in case you haven't heard of Simon, he is the founder of Sushi, Yotel, and all things Yo. He was actually one of the original dragons on the Dragon's Den, but today he's so much more than that. He's this incredibly enlightened man, and it is my joy to introduce you to him and introduce you to our conversation. Thank you. Simon, how lovely. Thank you so much for guesting on this podcast. It's such an honour. And we've spoken a couple of times. And I think that began because I think you've got an interest in rehabilitation.
I certainly have.
Yeah, and I'm very keen to continue a conversation with you about that. As you know, I do a lot of work in prisons. But today, I was hoping that we could talk about leadership, being a director, being a founder, being an entrepreneur, and the kinds of conflicts that arise when you take those kinds of risks in life.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Yeah, so maybe you could, talk a little bit about the things you've done. I mean, clearly you're pretty well known. Having been known as a founder of Sushi and all things Yo and Yotel, and you were one of the original dragons on Dragon's Den.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, amazing. So you must have seen a lot. You must have partnered with a lot of people, or worked with investors or partners or other directors, and had a vision. I guess that's part of you having a vision. And so I'd love to know talk us through that, the ups and downs, the highs and lows
of how I came to be who I am. No, I mean, I left school in 52, 62, in the sort of late 60s, at the age of 16 with 2 O levels. So, after a few hippy-dippy years, I realized having a bit of money coming in was, useful. And what did I like doing? And I like rock and roll music, and everybody says, do something which you love. And that's what I ended up doing, is getting into that whole world. And not so long after that, really as a roadie, putting the lights up for the early rock shows. And I started a lighting company with a guy called Ricky Farr. I met from who was the producer of the original Isle of Wight rock festivals, and he had a sound company. And when I look back, I'd had no training. I'd have no training in business or any of that. And I like lighting and I like rock shows. And I'd been saying to the big rock bands, you ought to have big spectacular shows like Busby Berkeley did in the 1930s. And they go, no, man, no. Because in those days, there was rock and roll and show business, and never the twain should meet. And so I knew lighting. And I actually remember what actually happened is Ricky knew a guy called Chris Blackwell, who ran Island Records, and he was going to put up the money for this enterprise. And I went to see I remember being very scared, very, very nervous. And I went to see the financial director of Island Records. I'd never sort of done anything in business before. And he gave us the money, and I went out and bought all the equipment, and we started a lighting company. And I suppose that's where it started. And in many ways, what you're talking about, that's where the problem started, because, I was pretty headstrong and I wanted it all my own way. And it took me many, many years to learn how to work as a team, I suppose you could say. And it was certainly the school of hard knocks in that respect. And, you know, I was very driven for a long, long time. At one time, I had a nickname, which was the steamroller. I heard that later from somebody. And although it's slightly embarrassing, I think, at the time, I look back on it with a certain amount of pride because it's what it took to make something happen. But I think the difficulty for me in business was not getting the job done, but was people. I always used to say, it was a silly glib thing to say, but I always used to say, business is easy. It's people that are difficult. So that's an introduction to where I started.
It's a really interesting and good take. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about how many people do actually, have a vision of something that they like and have no experience whatsoever, but they're driven. And that's what I heard you say. You were driven and you were certain, on some level, certain you could make things work. And I think that if I really dig into what I've heard you say, there was something about being good at, maybe you did get the nickname of the steamroller, and maybe that served you in some ways when you look back, being good at dealing with resistance. That's what
Yeah.
I would dig deep and say. And maybe you could speak a little bit to that, and maybe the brash way you might have done it back then that earned you a nickname, and how you might have modified that.
Well, Maria, life is difficult. I think is one of and business and everything is difficult, is one of the great realizations of great secrets of life, is when you truly realize that life isn't easy and that you're not entitled to anything at all, then you can start to put things together. You can start to go out and do what you need to do to make things happen. Say again, where were we going with this? I was for a moment I was taken away into remembering that young boy. So remind me where we were going.
Oh yeah, well, I mean it's a great thing to look back on because all of those experiences brought you to where you are. But I think what I was talking about was that you seem to be very good at dealing with resistance.
Resistance, yeah. Yeah, bombastic, you could say. I mean, it's got two sides to it. One is the driven thing I was talking about. That I I I think, having no real education, I never had the imagination educated out of me. So I was always able to have a vision, whether it be what would the lighting company be like, or later when I was designing stages, what would that be like, or television rights, how would I sell those, or in Sushi, what would it look like? So I always had a sort of vision of something, and I could imagine what it would be. And my job, I felt, was to get from here to there along the way and make as few mistakes as it's possible to make to get there. But I guess along the way, what you've got, all things conflict up on your behind you. And there were lots and lots of conflicts to get there. But I think if you can imagine what something is or what you want to get to, you've got a chance of getting there. If you can't imagine it, you've got absolutely no chance of getting there. So I suppose that was the driven part of it. And then, as I expect we're going to talk about, what were the relationships that you have to maintain in order to, for example, I used to come into the office, on a Monday morning, for example, and people would say, how was your weekend? And I was going to say, I used to think to myself, I think I probably said it to them. I'd say, well, what's that got to do with anything? It was almost as if we're in a war here, life, business, everything. Well, let's just focus on where we want to get to. And it took me a long time to learn that there's a certain, in Japan, they have a thing that they call nemawashi, which is a rather good word, I always think, because it's the ability to create rapport with other people. And if you go to a meeting in Japan, in America, you go to a meeting and they sit down, the first thing they say is okay, what's the deal? What's the deal, Simon? What are we going to do here? But in Japan, there's, the first, in a 1 hour meeting, the first 30 or 40 minutes is how's the family, what's going on, and it's creating rapport. And it took me a long time to learn how to do that. And actually, I do that now all the time. And I'll go to a meeting and I won't talk about what we're going to do at all. And another one is with people like yourself, in your role as a journalist now, to make friends with journalists and to be interested in what they're doing, as well as them being interested in what I'm doing. And to create that nemawashi, that rapport. And once you can do that, then it's amazing how you can get things done. I mean, the great leaders I've met are all, for the most part, they're all sorts of difficult. There's nice people and nasty people and aggressive people and very quiet, gentle people, all of who've been successful in business. So whatever your character, you can be successful in all of those different areas. So I don't know where I was going with that, but it's that was what took me a long time to learn, is that whole part of leadership. You know, yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah. So what I'm getting from listening to you is, there is a time to drive forward and there's a time to connect with people. Because obviously, if all you want to be is a plumber or, electrician working on your own, then you run your ad and you get your calls and you can, be completely
Yeah.
autonomous. But if you want to build something big, I mean, you're not going to build Yo Sushi on your own and run all the restaurants and cook all the food and serve all the customers. So you to make something bigger requires us to be in relationship.
Well, at the outset of Yo Sushi, looking back on that period of my life, I think I had a bloody good go, a very good go at trying to do everything myself. And actually, in this day and age, in terms of a starter, there's a lot of different sorts of business in this world, and I come from the startup businesses. And in startups, you can be a megalomaniac. And I think that in the first year or two or three of something that's new, startup, we live in an age when you can do everything. In fact, I learned how to do accounting on the computer. I learned how to do CAD drawing. I read a lot of legal documents, stuff that I've never thought I could do. And rather than putting it out to a third party and working as a team, I did it all myself. And I think that is actually a very, very good way to get something started. But once you are up and running, I mean, obviously, I'm just sort of hesitating there because obviously you have to have people you're working with along the way. But generally, to run the thing yourself, it's my way or the highway, is a good way to start. But as soon as you get a little bit bigger, then you have to step back. And I was very lucky because I did that. I stepped right back and let others do what I call it, is let other people do things their way, not my way. And in fact, with Yo Sushi particularly, I remember I brought in a guy to run the operations called Robin Rowland, who had never had a sort of leader role in terms of being a managing director or something. And he came in as operations director under me, and he worked for me for a year. And I remember him saying at one point, he said, "The thing about you, Simon, is you're very, very inspiring. And I could never have done what you did to get something started like this. I'm far too risk adverse. But, you on the one hand, you're inspiring and we all want to work with you, but then you can sort of crash and be screaming and shouting and all that good work you did in the last 3 months is worthless. And actually, you change your mind the whole time, which I did. I was always, oh, we're going to do something new. I always used to say, in those early days we were doing very well and the money was rolling in, but I was running the business, so the money was rolling right back out again. And so he said, you change your mind. And he said, what you should really do is, he said, I don't think you're going to do it because I know what you're like and you'll probably pull it all off. But what you should really do is hand it all over to me and my team and get on with looking at the bigger picture while I get on with running the business. And to everybody's surprise, that's exactly what I did. And I went off to, this is a few years in, but I went off to start the hotels later with Gerard Green, and did it work very well for me. And I remember my metaphor was I actually, we had a big sort of office with lots of offices, and I had my little suite in one corner, and I closed the door and I didn't open it. And the business wobbled for a few months, and then they got it together and they got up and did a very good job for the next 20 years. And that's actually what happened with the Sushi thing. Anyway, I handed over and let to others. And then there were times when they listened to me as well. But yeah, yeah. Well, I suppose what comes up for me there is that for the most part, for 90 or 95% of the time, you need to be, I do anyway. The way I've worked is I need to be encouraging to people. Um, and I haven't always been. I've tripped people up, but to be encouraging for 90 or 95% of the time, and then you can spend 5 or 10% of the time saying, look, I'm not happy with this, I'm not happy with that. But you can't do that too much. Mostly you need to encourage.
So when I hear you say that, what comes up for me is running things on the basis of goodwill. So build the goodwill, build the bank of goodwill, so that in the moments when you feel very strongly about something, or you really want people to listen, or there's some tough challenge to face, you're starting from a place of having built that goodwill. You haven't got to scramble to get it. Does that resonate for you?
Yeah, no, I think the bank, I've never heard that expression put quite that way, but I think the bank of goodwill is a very good way to put it. I mean, it's simple for me and it's taken me a long time to learn that. But I like working with nice people. Nice is a very, very broad word, but with people I can trust. I like people working with people who, one of the words I use, well, the two things I like is enthusiasm and people who over deliver. And so therefore I have to do the same thing to my people, is be enthusiastic about what they're doing and to over deliver. I mean, over deliver is the word I always use, especially to young people starting out. People go, well, I'm not sure if he's giving me enough, or, what am I going to do? And whatever you do, over deliver. Even if somebody does either rip you off in inverted commas or not pay you what you're worth or all of that stuff. Just carry on over delivering. And they're amazing, those people. I actually call them desert island people, because if you were on a desert island, those are the sort of people you'd want to have around, people who've got that very good manner, not only to over deliver in terms of what they produce, but to are easy to be around, and I don't think I was easy to be around. I think I'm a lot easier to be around now and people like me. I remember being at the Albert Hall, actually. I did a speech at the Albert Hall for the Institute of Directors, and the outgoing Institute of what they call him, the Director General of the Institute of Directors, did a speech, and he said that when I was a young man coming into, I think this is relevant, yeah. When I was a young man coming into business, I thought that if I could prepare a really good business plan and I had, stringent, well put together argument for what I wanted to do and achieve, and it was logical, that I'd be able to persuade people to follow me. And he said, as I go out at the age of my late 70s, early 80s, he said, as I go out, I've realized that if I can touch people emotionally, it's a much better way to persuade and engage than to argue with them rationally. And when I do speeches, for example, I've realized that, I say to people, if you're going to do public speaking, just know that mostly, and the same with on a podcast, most of the listeners today, they won't remember, 90% of what I've said, or indeed what you've said, but they'll remember the atmosphere and the feeling of that person. And of course, as you're listening to something, whether it's in a conversation or on a podcast or in a speech, you're thinking, how is this relevant to me? And how can I use this? And how can I adapt it in my own life? And that's what's going on. I don't know if that's relevant, but it feels right to emotionally connect with people. And then by the same token, there's that expression which is, this is different. This is business. And I don't think it is. I don't think business is any different at all. I think the same sort of rules and manners and all of that stuff, apply in your business relations as well as in your personal life. And I try to treat people as I would be treated myself. The difficult period that we're in history at the moment to live, especially in the West. I lived for a great deal of my life. I lived out in Asia, and in Thailand, for example, I'm talking about kids now. In Thailand, for example, in the schools, they don't have cleaners at all. No cleaners, no janitors, and the children clean the school every morning for half an hour after the playground, before school. They clean the school. They learn to work as a team, and of course, they learn manners. They learn the very thing. In Japan, they don't test kids until they're 10. They have the same thing. They clean up and do it, and we have a workforce that, for the most part, comes from, I would say, in this period, this last period of 30 or 40 years, an awful lot of fairly dysfunctional families, and I'm not talking just at the bottom end, I'm talking all the way through. We don't have a culture that is either very polite like the Japanese and well-mannered and respectful to older people. We don't have a culture like the Thais, for example, a very good example of people who have a very kind and generous and smiling and wanting to help each other. And that goes very deep. And when you have that, that's why if you go on Asian airplanes, the service is so good, because they come from a culture, and they say that in the hospitality business, in the hotel business. I say sometimes I say in Asia, well, how come you get such good service in this hotel? And I genuinely want to find out. And they say, really? I say, is the training that good? They say, we're not bad, but really it's because it comes from the right culture. So to really change that, we have to go into schools and teach things differently. So the change in that respect will come over a 10, 20, 30-year period, not what one political party puts into practice over a 4-year period. So what you're talking about, I think, is, how we conduct ourselves is a long program. And what I admire about you, actually, and I've been thinking a lot about recently, is in any area. For example, I'm doing a speech for some therapists coming up, and I was wondering what to talk to them about. And I think really what I'm going to say is, which one of you is going to stand up and put your head above the parapet and be the person who brings what you know and what you do into a much bigger public world, whether that be by podcast, whether it be on an app, whether it be in schools. And that is exactly what you're doing with this, is to put your head above the parapet. And hopefully, in the old days, you used to be able to, you wrote a book. And in fact, I happen to have, only coincidentally, that is the book of Yo Man is my new autobiography. But you write a book, or you do whatever, or we do what you're doing. And to put your head above the parapet, get noticed, and influence large numbers of people. That's the idea.
There's so much that you've shared with us there, and I want to try and pick out some of what I felt was really important. No, that's really just, I could listen to you all day. So, so there was something about this, the times we're in and the generations now. And how I describe it is actually, and you're comparing that to other cultures that are about giving service and gratitude, which we seem to have lost. And the way I speak about that is I say that what we have actually generated is the perfect product of consumerism and competition and the individual agenda. And that's what we're looking at. And when will we, as the adults, understand that we created this? This is the fruit of our labours.
But just say that again.
So that
Three things.
that we have created the perfect product that comes from consumerism and competition and the individual agenda.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's very good.
And so when you say it takes
Perfect
years,
storm.
perfect storm, and this is going to take years to undo.
So where do we go from there? I mean, how do we get out of that in terms of what I was saying about it has to happen in education over a period of time?
So there's a lot missing in our education system, isn't there? And as I said, when we get onto our education series, Simon, I'm definitely going to bring you back if you'll have me, because I think there's a lot for us to unpack. And as we look at this in the field of business and the way that, I think you were talking about connecting with people, that there's a journey that you've been on from being very transactional to actually realising that we can get more done if we connect. And the way I like to think about that is if you do things from logic and transaction, you'll make something that is the sum of the parts. Mm-hmm. But if you do something from connection, empathy, and shared human values, you'll make something that is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very good.
So I'd like to just go back, if I may,
yes,
to you, to maybe you can, I'd like you to perhaps talk about this in a way that would be a pearl of wisdom for people, making their way in that world of entrepreneurship, etc. I heard you say that, once upon a time you were very driven and transactional, and over time you've learned to connect with people and to be more loving. I'm going to use that word, be more loving and more connected. Was there a pivotal moment where something happened, or how did you transition? What would you say? What was your moments of enlightenment?
Well, I think I hit a rock bottom before I started Yo Sushi. And I remember going on a few of the, personal development had just started, and I went on a few of those sort of weekend courses. And then I actually I credit him to some extent, on an Anthony Robbins weekend. The first thing I thought when I saw that 1,000 people is they were paying 500 quid each. That was an awful lot of money he was making. So I like that. We did a whole weekend, and he was very goals orientated, very, very enthusiastic guy. He's actually a giant. A giant is 6'8", and he was a giant, and a very, very good public speaker, communicator. But he used to talk about setting goals, and I remember he got me to, it was his influence that got me to set out what my goals were for Yo, which I'd had the inkling of the idea about what I was going to do with Yo at that point. And I remember one part of that was to get fit and to be, fit mentally and physically. And he got me running. And I didn't just write my goals down, but I had them on a lanyard around my neck. And then I got a karaoke machine and I racked my goals to karaoke backing tracks and I put them on a headphone and I went running. And I'd never run more than 500 yards in my life. And I ran round Hyde Park, which is 5 miles if you run down the outside of Hyde Park. And when I got to Kensington, is it called Kensington Gate or Kensington Gardens or Kensington Palace Gate? That's what it's called. When I got to that at the end of a 5 mile run, I couldn't. It was the place where all those flowers were piled up when Princess Di died all those years back. And I remember, this was before that, but I remember getting to that gate and leaning against it and hyperventilating. And I had tears welling up in my eyes because the feeling was, and the words that came out of me was, if I can do that, I can do anything. And I think that was the time when I decided to do Yo, and was also the beginning of the transition from being a purely transactional person, i.e., a robot who wanted to get things done, into being somebody who could actually lead a team and command respect and be consistent. Because, you can't really trust other people until you can trust yourself. And I couldn't really trust myself to be consistent. I would always go off the deep end on something or other. And once I tamed that dragon and could trust myself, then other people could trust me. And, in a trusting atmosphere, that's what you need with a group of people, is for people to know that you're going to be consistent.
I couldn't agree more, and I love that. You can't expect trust if you don't trust yourself. You can't trust,
Yeah.
and the way I say that slightly differently is you can only love another person to the extent that you love yourself.
Well, that I never understood. You get a lot of these things about, there's a song, isn't it? Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. Or letting go is another one. And I never really understood those things. I never got it. But now I do understand letting go. I know what that means to me. And I understand learning to love yourself because, in many ways, it's more for me, it's more about respecting myself, respecting my ability to stick to my word, to be trustable. And you're right, you can't have a love affair of any sort, whether that's being with a friend, with a business person, with a husband or wife, until you actually love yourself, and then you've got the time to be able to do that. Yeah, so right.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing, and I'm gonna, our time's coming to an end, and if you don't mind, I'd like to just wrap this up. Is there anything? What are you doing now? How can people find out more about where you are and what you're doing? Because you've got a really good message for people, and I don't want anyone to miss out. So where are you? Where can we
Well,
find
no,
you?
I
We
mean,
saw the
you
book.
can. We are actually trying to. I'm making a lot of films at the moment, so I'm putting them out on TikTok and Instagram and the whole lot. And it's at Yo Simon Woodroffe or yo.co.uk, and it's easy to get hold of me. And actually, I made a resolution when I was younger that when I was actually knocking on people's doors and I never got replies, that if I ever got sort of to a position of being the person where people are knocking on my doors, I'd always respond to them. So if anybody asks me a question or writes, it may take a little while, but I will always get back to everybody. And yeah, I'm putting stuff out, and that's what I'm doing, and that's I suppose that part of my life is promotion for my new autobiography. But it's why am I doing it? It's fun to do it. It's fun. It's fun. I really enjoy it. And in the same way I enjoy talking to you, and you can tell that I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying myself. just thinking about all these things.
Amazing. I just want to say, I know we have to end now, but hearing you say that, when you knocked on doors and you didn't get a reply, and, you're kind of making that a personal thing, that you will do your utmost to reply to it, that has touched me so much. That really is a testament to the person that you are today, Simon. Thank you for saying that. So few people would give themselves in that way. Thank you. And this has been an absolute joy, and I'm looking forward to many more conversations.